Hey YouTube, Pete Turner here, and today we need to talk. We need to talk about a subject that I see frequently posted on social media and magic forums. It's a highly debated topic where posters have vastly different opinions, and it's a question that I get asked more than any other question. And the question is, what's better, a peak, a switch, or a center tear? Now, if you don't understand what those three terms are, then this is probably not the video for you. This is deep psychological stuff that's not for people that are just viewing these videos casually. Only magicians and mentalists will understand what I'm talking about, and the next 5 to 10 minutes you'll really get nothing from, so you'd be better looking at one of my other videos. This is just purely for people that already understand this stuff. Anyway, moving on. Like I say, I get asked this question so frequently, and I always try to side skirt giving an answer, and there's a reason why. I think it's a bad question. Now, I'm not saying the people that post those questions are bad, or the people that are trying to help in the comments are bad. I just think it's a badly formulated question. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take an example of a routine that has an autological presentation. You might be thinking to yourself, well, what's an autological presentation? It's a term that I created and one that you should commit to memory. And the reason I think you should commit it to memory is because it's really going to help you create harmonious presentations and methods that sit so well together. So what is it? An autological presentation is a presentation where the method's already inbuilt into that presentation. Let's take a drawing duplication on stage. Let's say there's 50, 60, 100, however many people. If you know that they need to make a large drawing for the audience to be able to see, and you gave them a clipboard and they made that drawing, and you took a clipboard and you duplicated it, you could easily give them an impression device and it'd work seamlessly without having to add compromise to the routine. And for that reason, the impression device there is a great method to use. And to find out what method works best in what presentation, you use what they call the toolbox test. And again, the toolbox test is something that I do with all my routines, and it enables me to quickly pick the best method. So what's the toolbox test? Well, what you do is you take a peak, then a switch, then a center tear. You hold it up to the presentation to see which fits the best. So let's take a look at a peak in the context of a stage drawing duplication. Well, let's say you give your spectator or participant a billet. You ask them to make a drawing. You've got to take that back to be able to peak, and then you're going to realize that the drawing's too small for the people at the back to see, and therefore what needs to happen is they need to redraw that drawing. So now there's this jarring moment where they're going to have to redraw a drawing, and yes, the peak will work, it'll fly, but is it better than the impression device? Well, no, because when they've got that impression device, there's no need to do anything else. The performance runs seamlessly. The same can be said for a switch. Take a look at a switch. If you switch out a billet successfully, well, at some point you're still going to have to say, oh, well, the drawing's too small, redraw it so the people at the back can see, unless you've got this epically large stage show where there's a camera that hones in specifically on the close-up action. And I think that can be detracting from the performance anyway. So let's take a look at a center tear. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just holding each of these methods up to the presentation to see if it fits. The center tear, something really interesting happens. Well, let's say you know you're going to have to make them redraw a drawing because it's too small. Well, how interesting is it at that point to apply a center tear when you're destroying it to then have them redraw it? Right? It works, it fits. The only time it doesn't fit is if you're doing several consecutive performances, because if somebody comes to see you over 2 nights, they'll think to themselves, well, wait a minute, didn't he learn that were too small the first night? Why is he having them redraw it on the 3rd night, having not learned that? And it stands out as a really jarring moment. So for all intents and purposes, the impression device, which you still have to peak, so I suppose it fits into the category of a peak, but it's not a billet peak, is the best tool for the job, and that's why it's called the toolbox test. Let's take that same drawing duplication and let's look at it in a close-up context. In a close-up context, a clipboard's going to be far too big. I think it's far too big. It's a strange prop to carry around, and it's almost like using a sledgehammer to crack open a walnut. It's too big. But that means you can reduce the size of the impression device, and that'll work perfectly. It's a viable tool that works for a drawing duplication because there's no odd jarring moment. Will a switch work in a close-up drawing duplication? Well, the answer is yes, all of these tools will work, but you've now got to switch the drawing out, look at where it is, and to hold them up side by side, you've then got to somehow switch back the drawing to be able to cleanly end. So you can't show them side by side. So you're doing double the amount of work that you would have to do if you just used a smaller impression device. The peak could work very nicely, because obviously with a peak, you're just looking, then duplicating, and you can hold them up side by side. Well, what about a center tear? Well, a center tear would work, but the problem is that you're destroying the drawing. And because you're destroying that drawing, what happens there is there's no way that you can hold them up side by side. So if you're using the wrong tool for the job, the only person that suffers is the audience. And the reason they suffer is because that revelation is a beautiful moment where you hold them up side by side. For anybody that's thinking you don't need to do that, just take a look at how powerful Uri Geller's routines were. When he did a drawing duplication, I don't think there were anybody on the planet that did a better drawing duplication than Uri. And that's because he would hold them up side by side, and he had little touches where he'd fold them in half and put them next to each other, and they were almost identical, right? And it goes to show that that's a very easy test that you can use to be able to know exactly which method to use for the job. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, well, where would a center tear fit in? Well, let's say that you were doing a celebrity wedding and you decided, not actually performing for a celebrity, but you decided you were going to create a plot that's surrounding a celebrity wedding. You pull somebody out of the audience and they're to think of a crush or a celebrity that they've liked their entire life. And if that celebrity asked them to marry them, they'd say yes in a heartbeat without any second questions. They could invite a best man or somebody up onto the stage, and you'd say, right, we have me, who's going to oversee the events, we have the bride or groom, we have the best man or whatever, and you say, right, what we need now is you need to know who they're marrying, so take this, write it down. Have we got some confetti? No, we don't. Right, do you know who that is? Well, we'll tear this up now. We've got confetti, right? And so now you're using the center tear as the confetti in this celebrity wedding. Well, would a peak work there? Well, yes, it would. But because you're going to be destroying the billet anyway, it doesn't make sense to take the billet, peak it, hand it back, now ask them to tear it. You might as well start tearing it, get your peak using whatever center tear it is that you're going to use, keep tearing, give it to them, tell them to continue tearing as you're talking, now use that as the confetti. That 100% makes sense. You're cutting out one block of the performance that doesn't need to exist. And the person that benefits from that is the audience, right? They benefit from that completely because it's as seamless as it can be and it's all interesting all the way along. Well, would a switch work in that setting? Well, yeah, of course a switch would work in that setting, but they'd be tearing up something that doesn't have anything on the inside of it, and when they throw it, if it lands on the floor, then what's going to happen is they're going to see that there's not little bits of writing or whatever. And yes, you could prep a billet, the dummy billet with writing on it, but what you're having to do there is you're having to do double the amount of work that you'd have to do if you just learned a center tear, right? If it's a routine where you're going to have a spectator diminish or destroy their fears, and they're going to write something down on a piece of paper and then they're going to destroy it to metaphorically represent destroying this thing in their head, a center tear would work great for that. Whatever method you're using, it needs to sit perfectly in line with the presentation. So take your toolbox, learn each of the different methods, and then simply hold them up to the presentation and see which one fits the best. Take any other context in the world. Imagine that you'd hired a workman to come into your house and a screw needed putting into the wall for whatever reason, right? They're screwing up a bracket to hold a television. If you came into your house and you saw that work person smashing a screw into the wall and you didn't ask them to leave, then there's something severely wrong. You get the best quality job by choosing the right tool for the job. It doesn't mean that you can't use other tools to substitute if they're going to achieve the same result, but it takes mere seconds to be able to hold up each method to the presentation so that they become autological. If you want to learn more about this type of stuff, I've recently written this article up in more depth in Jack Goldstein's new book. Now, I'm not trying to plug that or promote it because I get nothing from it. I'm just saying if you like this type of philosophy, you'll find more of it over there. And if you want to learn about autological presentations, I have a new book coming out with Mind Effects. It's a limited edition hardback book that contains an entire chapter on these autological presentations and how you can build and formulate better routines that are more engaging for your audience. So I hope you can see when you ask me the question of what's better, a peak, a switch, or a tear, it's not the right question. What you should be asking is, what's the right tool for the job? And I think we'll end this here. It's the perfect place to end. If you're not subscribed to my channel, click subscribe, click the little bell icon. The next time somebody asks you what's better, a peak, a switch, or a center tear, you know that you can say it's whatever tool's best for the job. Take care.